Hi listeners, Jason here. PHSCon 2024 was nothing short of amazing. We had 400 community members come together, both in person and online, to rapidly progress our understanding and practice of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. Over the 2 days, we laughed together, we were inspired, and we learnt. If you missed out, don't worry, on-demand access to content is now available at phscon.com. Plans are already underway for a bigger and better PHSCon back in Sydney for 2025. So save the date for next year when we return to a larger venue on June 19th and 20th. Now, on to this episode.
Welcome to this week's Psych, Health and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Each week, we seek to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experience, research, and expertise of our guests, as well as advocating strategies to reduce harm and minimize vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. Well, we finally made it. This is our 100th episode of the podcast. For the first time, the podcast was actually recorded outside the United States. I had the opportunity and a pleasure to travel to Sydney, Australia, with our friends at Flourish DX, who sponsored the Psych, Health and Safety Conference there in beautiful downtown Sydney. It was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to gather together with folks who are interested in this topic from across the globe and to be able to share a few of my thoughts regarding psychological health and safety. In this particular case, the connection between psychological health and safety, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a topic that we've talked about before on the podcast. But this time, the guest is yours truly. And thank you to Wade Needham, who was the interviewer. Wade and I actually met there for the first time, and he did a fantastic job of conducting the interview. So again, here is that presentation there in Sydney, Australia. And that's what we have for this 100th episode of the Psych, Health and Safety USA podcast.
From Flourish DX, this is the Psych, Health and Safety USA podcast. As workplace mental health has become a global priority, there's a greater focus on addressing psychosocial hazards. Each episode, we look at psychological safety from an occupational health and safety perspective. Let's talk Psych, Health and Safety.
Well, we've reached a milestone for the podcast, and we'll share a very special episode recorded in Sydney, Australia. Up next on this episode of the Psych, Health and Safety USA podcast.
Well, thank you. I want to do something just before we get started in the conversation. I'd like to ask everyone to come to your feet, if you would. Let's all stand up. And I'd like you to look that way to the folks who are lined up on that wall over there, and I'd like to give them a round of applause for. Thank you so much for the service you've provided since we've been here as a resident of the hotel for the last couple of days. It's been really cool. So again, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Just before we came on, we were having a chat to one of the hotel management staff, and that's the first time that staff have ever been acknowledged as part of any conference. So you can imagine how many conferences are here a year. Imagine how many people come through those doors. And I think if you take away one thing today, imagine the power that has created just in one small act of kindness.
Absolutely.
So it's
Absolutely.
fantastic. So
Absolutely.
I'd love to open it up, David, to really the CV that we just heard. I don't think really gives the actual depth of what you've accomplished, but also secondly, just for people in the room to understand the context. So, Australia is a very different jurisdictional context than the US or other regions. I think it'd be great for you to sort of give some context to the people in the room as to what do you see day in, day out in the areas that you operate and also the leaders that you're dealing with.
So let me wrap that answer in something else that, again, is going on at the same time. This is a really special opportunity for me. It's a special opportunity because kids like me don't get to do stuff like this. We don't get the opportunity to fly into the future. The first time I've ever flown in the future, crossing the date line. And folks in my community don't often get the opportunity to talk about psychological health and safety because we're generally not really considered in the conversation because we weren't in the room when the concept was created. I'm the proud product of a 14-year-old who had me. As a matter of fact, I'm going to ask you to do something before we do. And all this is being recorded for the 100th episode of the Psych, Health, and Safety USA podcast. So, yay. But I think all that context is really important that people, that I acknowledge who I really am and what's really important to me. And I never forget about the fact that I'm again, my mom was 14 when I was born. She dropped out of middle school to have me and my other six siblings. And I was told the vast majority of my young life that my family was dysfunctional. I'd never be anything, never be able to accomplish anything. And I found out I was a little hard-headed. I just didn't want to do that and decided I don't want to be a part of that stereotype. And that really connects to this whole conversation about when we talk about psychological health and safety, who are we talking to? And what does that mean to them? And it means something different to everyone else. And as much as I guess I'm kind of an academic, not really, I guess some days, but this is more than just the academic conversation. This is about how do human beings feel safe in the spaces that they're in? Mm. And so back to the question about the folks I interact with, they're all over the place. Mm. I generally don't spend a lot of time in the C-suite because, have you looked at the C-suite recently? It's not a place I'd necessarily get an invitation to because I'm not in the country club or I didn't go to school with their kids. And it's not that I'm necessarily a good or bad person, neither are they. We just haven't had familiarity. They weren't raised on my street. The Fortune 500 in the United States doesn't generally look like me. So we don't hang out in the same places. So we don't have the opportunity to be able to share. And I've got some interesting things to say, and so do they. But we just don't often cross. So I spend a lot of my time with small businesses and local governments who don't have conversations about safety-related stuff. And they're kind of my heart. The folks who are in the room, that is what my mother was doing when I was in elementary school. So I still remember, her working at the Seattle Olympic Hotel in Seattle, folding laundry and keeping folks' rooms clean. So that's why that type of thing is important to me. And when we have this conversation about safety in all its facets, I think we ought to include everybody, not just some people.
It's an interesting thought because we're chatting around the diversity of the room, and what is often said is, should the advisory to our leaders look like our leaders, or should it look like the people that are injured? Mm. And I don't know whether you want to expand upon that as to how do we bring in those diverse perspectives, but also maybe sometimes balance the need for wanting to do the right thing, but maybe not connecting with those people that could use it.
Sure. Safety, like most systems, is perfectly designed to produce whatever it's currently producing. And if we look at the history of many of our safety-related systems, there was a kind of a homogeneous group that created them. So I figured out that I do everything perfect for me. Works wonderful for me. It doesn't work well for other people all the time, including the person I've been living with for the last 37 years. Who, and again, it doesn't make it right or wrong, good or bad. It just says that I have a way that I see the world, and I create spaces around me that are safe and effective for me. But so it's said that about 50 million new businesses are going to be created on the planet every year. It's about 137,000 a day, new businesses. Those businesses tend to be set up to work for the person who created it. Mm. And that's not a Good or bad thing. It's not a judgment, but it's made in their image. It's made based on what they think is important. And again, that's great until they bring that second person and 10th person and 1,000th person. Many of these systems are still set up to be safe for the people who started it. And we're having this interesting conversation around, we want to make it psychologically safe. I one of these days, I'd love to meet Dr. Edmondson. Would love to, be able to chat with her. I haven't been able to do that, but I'm an admirer of her work. But there's a kind of a thing with inviting people to bring their whole self to something that wasn't designed for their whole self. So bring your whole self. We want you to feel safe here, but you didn't design it for me to be able to do that. And a lot of that, again, not good or bad. I say often that we're generally expected in most of our professions to be clothed when we come to work. And that's not a good or a bad thing, unless you work in one of those clubs where they don't wear clothing. But it's about context. But often we don't make that clear to people. We don't think about it ourselves. I created it, it's safe for me. If you're coming here, you're going to have to be like me. And it's okay for you to be like you, but I want to be like me. And I've had enough birthdays, and I'm secure enough now that I'm not going to be like you. I don't want to be like you. There's nothing bad about that, but I want to be me. I want to do my thing, say it my way, express. And if that's not something that you're interested in, I'll go and find another group who will, because there's somebody out there who will. Even if that means I have to sit in the room and talk to myself, which I've done on occasion.
I think you've got a few more people here that would like to participate. So obviously in Australia, we've had a very large influx of regulatory pressure, codes of practice. We've had the Boland Review. We've engaged in additional regulations. Can you give us some insight into how that's currently playing out in the US? And if you don't have those levers, what other levers are you pulling?
Yeah, well, we don't have that. From a safety perspective, we're still trying to figure out the physical safety part. So the Occupational Safety and Health Act in the United States was passed by the 91st Congress, 1970. There are 535 people who voted on it. Only 2% of the folks who voted on the act would gender identify as female. So when they wrote the act, it says, and you can read it today, it still says his work, his employer, his this, his that, when the vast majority of workers in the United States don't gender identify as male. The same issue applied to only 2% of the people would be visually identified as Black either. So it's not surprising to me that that act and what it produces doesn't produce the same outcomes for everybody, because it wasn't designed to. As a matter of fact, we are still, So another thing that comes to mind, happy Juneteenth.
What is that, by the way? Yeah.
So I'm fortunate enough to have been able to do one presentation last evening and this one today that currently in the United States, we're celebrating Juneteenth. Juneteenth this is the second year of celebrating a holiday that is celebrated every year on June 19th. It is a celebration of the day when folks in Galveston, Texas, who had been enslaved, found out that the Emancipation Proclamation was signed 2.5 years ago. And they found out about it 2.5 years later. So this is, there's that celebration today, my presence here is just interesting to be able to celebrate in another country. And folks who probably have no idea what that is, a lot of folks in the U.S. don't know what it is either. And but in the midst of that celebration, we have 19 states that still have slavery written into their constitutions, and it's still technically legal as long as you're in the criminal justice system. So these are some of the challenges that we're working through as a country, and but we're still in the midst of that. If you look at the global survey that came out from actually last week, that talks about the state of the global workforce, the folks at Gallup, that we have the highest engagement in the entire world in that very same country. So so some of these topics make people nervous when we talk about them, but they're both true. And two things can be true at the same time. You can have an environment that wasn't necessarily built for and by everybody that still works pretty good in some regards, but it we can always be better. That's what it's about. And to the extent, Australia has regulation. So people do safety things for one of three reasons. They have this moral, ethical reason. They think it's important. It's the right thing to do. Or they recognize that they're going to save themselves a lot of money by doing it, or they're forced to. You pick which one you want, because if you do this one, you get the other two. If we are simply focused on doing the right thing for the right reason at the right time with the right people, and that's determined by you and me, not determined by a standard, it's determined by you and me. So again, I know what's good for me. Hopefully you know what's good for you, but we have to determine what's good for us. You cannot determine what's good for me unless unless I allow you to, and I'm not going to. We are going to determine that. That's probably one reason why I've ended up with a lot of different jobs, because I won't kind of bow in that way. It's, no, we can do this. I don't work for anyone and never will work for anyone ever again. I work with you. So working with you may mean that I am the custodial staff. It may mean that I'm, a receptionist. It may mean I'm the CEO. But both of those roles, if they're not important, why do we have them? So we should be working with each other, contributing what we bring so we can accomplish whatever it is we've decided we want to get done.
So that we word, in the United States, diversity, equity, inclusion has been quite a large lightning rod for both positive and not so positive. How is that shaping some of the conversations that you're having? And are you finding, is that a lever or a pull through, or how is that shaping some of how you can then utilize those avenues for psychosocial hazard management?
It kind of depends on who's in the room. We're an extremely diverse country in a lot of ways. And we're really diverse in the way we think. Most of the globe is that way. Again, with some of our complicated history, it gets discussed in different ways. But I'm absolutely convinced that you cannot achieve and maintain diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, any of that other stuff without attention to the psychosocial hazards that exist in the environment that you put people in. Same back to Dr. Edmondson's conversation about psychological safety. You can get psychological safety by accident. Literally, you can. Because if I take four people exactly like me, we were raised in the same community, we like the same things, we go to the same golf, tournaments and play chess together, or whatever we do, and the four of us get together, it's going to be really psychologically safe for the four of us. But when we bring in the fifth person, who is different, and whatever their difference might be, they're the way they think, the way they look, when you bring in a different person, how do we adjust this environment to the new person we've just added? We added them for a reason. And unfortunately, what we often do is we add people to systems that weren't built for them. And then we wonder why they're not successful and why they don't feel comfortable. And you just didn't think about it. So I was a firefighter in the city of Seattle, spent 32 years in the fire rescue service. And when I came on the job 4 years after the first woman was hired, the department was created in 1889. The first woman was hired in 1977. And so we did the checkbox exercise of hiring a woman, but didn't think about the fact that perhaps we should have restrooms that also accommodated women. So it took us 7 years to figure that out. Well, no, it really wasn't 7 years. It was the lawsuit that caused everybody to figure out perhaps we should do something about that. Again, another example of how we don't create safe environments before people show up and then wonder why they're uncomfortable when they show up. And so, and again, this is to me absolutely fundamental. In order to create a psychologically healthy and safe environment, we have to be able to identify the psychosocial hazards that are in the room, period. They will be in the room because there are other humans in. And I'll say this so I can get this into the conversation. My definition of a psychosocial hazard is unique to my research. And a psychosocial hazard is a psychosocial factor that's perceived or experienced by the person exposed as a threat that in turn causes them to behave in a different way. perceived or experienced by the person exposed. Doesn't matter what your law says. Doesn't matter what your policy says. Doesn't matter how you've traditionally done it. Doesn't matter how, it may be great for everyone else. But to me, my brain, my amygdala fires up when that thing happens to me based on my experience, based on my perception. And again, my perception is not wrong. It is not right. It is simply mine. And I think that's what gets left out. So we create these wonderful systems, again, created by whomever, and we don't consider that we are all just different. And there's some folks that think, oh, that's just way too much work for us. No, actually it isn't, because a lot of these mitigation strategies are really pretty easy. And the data is in the room. It says that doesn't work well for me. And I feel comfortable enough saying that. And the thing that would be more comfortable probably will save you money. It'll certainly make me more effective. It might make us all better. It may not. But if we have these kinds of environments that are designed on the front end that way, so what if we started a business, did a startup, and from the beginning, we assumed that this is about creating a psychologically healthy and safe place for all the humans we're going to bring in. And that, whether we make money or not is secondary to that. Wouldn't that be interesting? Because I'd submit that you'll make more of it.
Do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the Flourish DX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow Flourish DX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the Flourish DX Academy. www.45003.org. Now back to this episode.
It's a good place to start because leaders often don't start a business to make $1 million. They often start to fix a problem.
Absolutely.
And so from that perspective, leaders have I think a quite hard task at the moment because there's a lot of functional advisory people coming at them from different directions with different priorities. And so maybe for the group that has a diverse stakeholders that they're supporting and their leaders have access to multiple perspectives, how are you working with others in multidisciplinary way? Or how do you have those conversations with a leader who's got a HR person telling them something, a safety person, you've come into the room? How does that go? How are you working with others? And how do you think it's done in a way that gets the greatest impact over the longest time?
Well, first of all, through therapy, I've learned how not to make your problem my problem. I don't do that. I'm not the person to convince people that they have a problem. That's really not my job. Even as a safety professional, it's not my job to make people safe. It's my job to provide information so you can make a decision about what you're going to do that may or may not expose you to different kinds of hazards. It's a little kind of complicated, but I'm not all powerful, all knowing, all seeing. I have a view and a perspective that may be valuable to you, which is hopefully why we're having the conversation. And I found that some of the fire rescue background comes in because people tend to call me when the house is on fire. You could have called to talk about smoke detectors and escape plans, but I was an inspector as well. But folks aren't generally interested. They wait till the house is on fire, then they call people like me, we go to put the fire out. And that's okay, but I can tell you that there are a lot of things that can be done way before we had this problem or the problem that they're currently experiencing that would make that better. But I really don't. You have to, not have to. It is helpful for you to recognize that you have something going on. You want that to be different, and you'd like some assistance doing that. I don't go to board meetings and sit there and try to convince people to spend a bunch of money on things they don't want to do. People do, and I said this last night, people do things for one reason and one reason only, because they feel like it. I feel like it. I was the CEO, so I did it. We were the company we wanted to acquire, so we did it. It's because they felt like it. And all the data and studies and research and all of that is interesting, But if people don't feel like it, they're not going to do it. There are a lot of folks talking about diversity, equity, inclusion. We want to make this an open place for everyone. Well, not really. Mm-hmm. Your words say it, but your actions say something altogether different. So your actions often speak so loud, I can't hear a word that you're saying. And it would be preferable to me if people are just a little bit more honest about what it is they really are trying to do. Not every group, organization, get together can be open to every single solitary person. That's just not reality. So we should, in my opinion, stop telling ourselves it's open to everybody. But who is it open to? And if you say it is open to me, then hopefully you've thought about that before I show up, not when I show up. Just be clear about that. So again, I talk a lot about the fire rescue industry system, again, around the world. It was built for and by men. So, and a lot of the things that it does were designed by men. So until we got women in the room to have the conversation about how we're going to solve it, it continued to be difficult, and it will continue to be difficult for people who are different. The same thing applies to whatever it is that you do. If you want to be diverse, have different people, equitable, give people what they need, not what you think they should have, and inclusive, then it's going to require a conversation with people. You don't do safety-related things to people or for people. You do them with people. So whether I know anything about, I may not be an engineer or a lawyer or a doctor or whatever the profession may be, but I know how I feel. And I know what works for me. And if you want to help me, serve me, include me, ask me. Now, if you don't really want to do anything about it, just don't ask. That's something that many of us have observed over the last few years, particularly so. There was this tremendous uprising around the world after the murder of George Floyd. A lot of corporations threw a lot of money at, oh yeah, we're going to spend Black Lives Matter. We're going to throw money at that. Then a couple of years later, they put their $200 billion back in their pocket and decided it wasn't important anymore. And there are many of us who feel like that's okay, but don't make the commitment in the first place. That's not something that we want to get into because that really hurts. It hurts to be there's a thing called tokenistic fallacy where we take the one person who seems to be thriving in that environment and then we go, it's all solved. Well, not really. It's that person. It's not everyone. Why? Because it really wasn't built for anyone other than the group who's there. And again, it doesn't make the people who are in the system bad people. Every system is perfectly designed to produce whatever it's currently producing. So it was created to keep a certain group safe. It's doing a great job there. Do you want it to work for others? Include those others in the conversation about the design. Include those in the conversation about identifying the hazards for them. It might not be hazards for you, but they're hazards for them. And to the extent we can have that conversation, we'll be on the journey. You don't ever really get there. Arthur Ashe was a great tennis pro in the United States, and he suggested that success is not a destination, it's a journey.
For people that are in the room that may feel like, Jesus, this is a big task. I've got social determinants of health to consider. I've got new regulation. I've got business models that are really challenging to this new way of thinking. How do you balance the need to make a difference in the world, but also still go to sleep at night? Like, how do you help?
Yeah, again, there were a lot of conversations in my house about helping other people. As a matter of fact, I watched my mom as she got older to start recognizing that if you don't take care of yourself, you won't be able to take care of other people. I think that's what goes on with caring, supportive, warm-hearted people is they spend so much time taking care of everyone else that they don't do a good enough job taking care of themselves. So charity begins at home and safety starts at home as well. So if you want to make the environment safe, what is safe for you? What's important to you? What do you really value? What is really critical in your life? What gives you peace and joy and contentment? Because again, sometimes people don't spend enough time on that. Then we come into the workplace and we spend our time talking to other people about what's important to them, what you should be doing, and I don't really know what's good for me. And it plays out in the way I behave. I'm not really happy here either. I know I'm the CEO, I'm the vice president, but I really hate this place just as much as you do. And it comes out in the way I behave. It comes out in the way I interact with other people. I really don't. The check was nice, or I got recruited and I enjoyed it. But because I didn't know enough about myself, there are some jobs you shouldn't ever take. You shouldn't have taken it, and you know it. And when you go home, you think about it on the way home. Why did I do this? Because you weren't considering your own safety, what's important to you, what matters to you. And so the other thing that I heard a while back is that we can only give to others out of our abundance. So I can't provide psychological health and safety when I'm struggling myself because I don't know what to give you. I can't give you extra advice on something I know absolutely nothing about. I can't help you deal with your stress when I'm so stressed out myself that I can't make a decision to save my life. So it's that internal work about what's important to me, what works for me, and then Wade, then the conversation is, what is good for us? Not what's good for you. Hopefully you have that figured out. What's good for us? This isn't about me now. I've got my peace and joy. I know what works for me. Now, between the two of us, what works for us? What is it that we can contribute so we can achieve whatever it is we're here to achieve? And those conversations to me don't occur enough. And then we make this, we've got 10,000 people, but I only work with about 8 of them. So what's going on in the group of 5 or 6 or 8 people that I'm around most days? How do we work with each other? How do we support each other? What kind of environment do we want to have? What is psychologically healthy and safe for us? And it might look different across the organization, and it's okay. Different does not mean deficient. It's just different, that's all. Doesn't mean it's good or bad. It just means it's different. Now again, it's important that we have some guardrails. And those guardrails really should be identified when people come into the organization. So this is a wonderful place, but these are some of the things that we don't do. We don't bully each other here. We don't harass each other here. So in your new employee or new worker or new member organization, new member orientation, people should know on day one what will get them killed and what will get them separated from the organization. On day one. On day one. They shouldn't have to worry about that. There should be some outer perimeter of behavior that this thing, that's not going to work here. Those are the things we don't do here. And we really love you, but we're going to help you be successful doing something else if you do that thing. But people need to know that on day one. They need to know what they're getting themselves into. I found in my research so the title of my dissertation was The Lived Experience of Black Workers' Exposure to Psychosocial Hazards in the American Workplace. I interviewed 12 Black people from 9 states. All were middle managers. None supervised anybody directly, but kind of middle management, and asked them about their exposure to these various things. And one of the results that I found is that people can adjust if they know what they're adjusting to. We can adapt to an environment if I know what I'm adapting to. It is important enough to me. Nothing's going to be perfect. So if you're looking for the perfect job, it doesn't exist. Perfect organization doesn't exist. And if it was perfect, it won't be when I show up because I'm not perfect. But if I know what I'm getting myself into, I can prepare myself because, so it's that effort reward balance thing. I know there's going to be some of this, and in return, there's going to be some of this. I knew when I started with the city of Seattle as a firefighter that I was going to be going into buildings on fire. I knew that. Matter of fact, they taught us really well how to do that. What they didn't tell me is I'd be seeing people die in front of me. I was 21 years old, and I show up at a guy's house, and he's talking to us, and an hour and a half later, he's dead. Nobody told me about that. Nobody told me that a year and a half on the job, I see my first colleague die. Nobody told me that over the course of 32 years, I'd see 30 people who either got killed at work or died from something they were exposed to at work. They didn't tell me that part. So I had to kind of figure that part out on my own. And ultimately, that's the lasting legacy of the entire experience. Let's be clear about what this is to the extent we understand these are the types of things and be honest about them. Be upfront about them. People aren't stupid. They can figure it out. And then I can make a decision about whether or not I'm the type of person to do that type of thing.
There's a real challenge in Australia right now around the risk assessment process with psychosocial. And I think leaders are struggling to set a risk threshold as to what does acceptable look like. And typically when we'd be dealing with occupational health hazard, we'd split people up into specific exposure groups by role.
Right.
From what you've told us today, it's really challenging because it's not just about the role, it's about the people in the role.
Exactly.
So how do I, who typically had a really good way to measure exposure over the organisation, you've given me this new information, I feel like I have to do something with. Have you got any words of encouragement or how can people make sure that the box we're measuring people in is the right box and we get resources to where it's needed?
I would suggest that you not look at whether or not the box is right or wrong, but does it accomplish whatever it is we're trying to accomplish at the time? Because who says it's right? Who said it's wrong? Somebody kind of decided. So this is the goal we're trying to achieve. This is what we're about. And again, sometimes, as a matter of fact, all the times, there are hazards associated with any and everything that we do. So that water, that H2O, if I add more H to it, it becomes bleach. And the way it affects people is really the same because it has this kind of biological effect if I put it on my skin. Psychosocial hazards are not that way. And I'm sure Dave's still in the room. He talked about the fact that it's not this linear sequential, if this, then that. It is all over the place. So get used to that. But the question is, how does it affect this person? How does it affect this? So remember, Stephen Covey talked about your circle of control and your circle of concern, that whole kind of the area where I can make a difference. Let's make a difference there. Again, first with me, what's important to me, what works for me. And then next, with the group that I am, what is safe for us? What works for us? And let that be the measure of success in that area. I'll say this, not time for a couple of questions, I guess. Success is not determined at the end of a thing. Success or failure is determined at the beginning of the thing. Hello.
Hello, thank you. What another remarkable conversation, and you've added a completely different lens to our conversation. Thank you so much for that, Wade. I have joined the conversation to give you some questions from the audience, both virtually and in the room. But I do have to give you the top comment first of all, which is Dr. I. David Daniels for president.
Yeah, maybe not.
It would be nice, wouldn't it? You've talked a lot about diversity and shared your lived experience, so thank you so much for that, because that is the broader lens. We talked about it earlier, but I don't know about in the States, but here definitely diversity and work health and safety do tend to sit separately. Do you have any advice? Because a lot of us are really embarking on the journey. How do we bring them together? The responsibility for WHS sits there, diversity, inclusion, belonging here. Have you got any thoughts or how we can actually, when you talk about building the systems, what do we do to get that diverse voice involved?
If you build a system that is safe for everyone that you expect to be in the system, you won't have to have the other conversations. I wish I could say it's more complicated than that. But it's first deciding who is this system for?
Yep.
Who's the system for? If this system is for male, female, non-binary, if it is for everyone, then it has to be safe for all of them. So, but we have to know who's going to be in the circle and define that circle up front. Let's not wait until later. Define it up front and then continue to adjust it as we change and as new people come into the circle. Because just because it worked well for us 10 years ago when we were, had fewer birthdays, even we're going to change. So it's this constant assessment of what is safe for us going forward. What is safe for us going forward? This is where we're going next. What's going to be safe? When we went into house fire, we did different things when we went into a hazardous material spill or to a technical rescue. It was a different set of equipment that I wore based on the hazard I was going into. And there were some cases we said, we're not going to go do that. We're not doing that thing. There are some buildings that were that we weren't going to go into, period, because there is nothing to be saved. There's nothing but bad things are going to happen. But that decision was made up front. Yeah. So I would make the decision early.
I can imagine a lot of the people responsible for driving psycho health and safety are kind of going, oh my goodness, another complicating factor in terms of what is already a very difficult thing for us to do. Mm-hmm. Which personally I'm thinking there's a lot of pressure to meet regulations. It's like, well, how do we do this at the same time? How do we build in all those needs? But I think practically you're just saying, let's bring the diverse populations into the conversation at the start.
Yes. Let's not sit in our corner office and decide what's safe for everybody without having conversation with the people we say we want it to be safe for. Yeah. And the other thing too, from my occupational health and safety folks that are in the room, psychosocial hazards are not different from physical ones. They're just another one. Yeah. And my belief is there are physical and psychosocial hazards, period. The same way we would handle these, we handle these. We have to identify them. We have to know how they're affecting us and what we're going to do about it, if anything.
Yep, love it. A more broad question. What have you learnt or taken away from your time in Australia and the work we do in this space? Now, I know you've only been here 36 hours?
Yes. Yeah.
He's not found the Opera House yet, but you're going to do that today?
Yeah, I guess I better see the Opera House. So a lot of what I've learned about Australia, I've learned over the last couple of years talking through video to Jason and the crew at Flourish DX, to be quite honest. And I have to say this. We got on the phone about 2.5 years ago. I'd never met him. He'd never met me. We talked for about an hour. And when the conversation was over, there was a podcast thought about. And I can tell you that in 2.5 years, I've never had a phone call that says, hey, you can't talk about that. And who are those people? And that feels really empowering to be able to know that the conversation, that's sometimes the advantage of not having a regulation. I have these conversations about psychological health and safety in the U.S. because I think it's the right thing to do. And trying to get the attention of other people who think it's the right thing to do. And we can do it without having a law, without having a standard, just believing in other people. And that's a reason why we've had 54% of our guests have been female. And there's been a half and half split between white and non-white people. And we've had gay people and transgender people and disabled people and people who are immigrants, because this conversation applies to any and everyone. And so what I've learned is that people like that who just happen to live here have some really good ideas, and I'm game to being in on it with them.
Well, that's a surprise. They've got good ideas. Who'd have known?
Who'd known?
Who'd have known? Yeah. A specific question, so you might want to gather your thoughts on this one. So in Australia, some of our psychological workers' compensation claims may be excluded based on the worker's perception of the work environment versus the employer's response. Yeah?
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah. I don't believe that the conversations about work should be balanced. I don't. Most of the responsibility is on the employer, because you started the business, you determined the hazard you were going to expose people to, you wrote the job description or didn't, you interviewed this person or called your cousin and told them to come work for you, however you did it. You brought that person into the environment. You have more control, more influence, more ability to make a difference than the worker does. It is on you. And it doesn't really, our perception is different. That says something about the folks who are making the decision. It doesn't make them bad people, but I do believe that there is a generation, particularly our Gen Zers and Gen Alphas, that aren't going to go for that. Yep. So you're going to find that some folks aren't going to come work for you. If my opinion isn't important enough, I'm not going to work here. And if I do, I won't work here long. So some of this is a survival mechanism for organizations. If you don't want to take care of this person, somebody else probably will. And we have an environment now where they can opt out, start a YouTube channel, and live in their van and be better off than working for you anyway.
Dr. Daniels, I'm going to read the quote. It says, "My favorite speaker by far. Thank you so very much."
Thank you.
So if you're watching or listening to the podcast for the first time, welcome. I hope something that you heard will bring you back again in the future. Previous episodes of the podcast can be found at psychhealthandsafetyusa.com. You can watch, like, subscribe, and share the podcast on the Flourish DX YouTube page. Please do join the Psych Health and Safety USA movement by connecting and becoming a subscriber on LinkedIn. So until the next time, stay tuned and look out for the next episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast.
Tune in each Friday for new episodes of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. If you have a story or know of one that needs to be told, reach out to us on LinkedIn or send an email to david@id2-solutions.com or go to the Flourish DX website at flourishdx.com. We'll see you next time.